In our nursery, we're kind of doing a last planting right now of a lot of our summer crops. We're also getting started on some of our longer growing season fall crops, as well as some of our more heat tolerant, not really summer loving, but I have them in the summer category because we can start them at various times during the summer. These are all under the heat loving greens and things list on the website. Now, some of the things that we have available in the nursery right now, this is a great time to get some of our Florida natives in your garden, some of our flowers, eggplants, peppers. We're going to be starting tomatoes here in probably about another week to 2 weeks in the nursery, all kinds of tomatoes. We have another round of native milkweeds that are available. The amaranths, which is kind of like an African spinach, and roselle. If you've not tried the Jamaican sorrel or Florida cranberry and you want to have it harvested in the fall, now is the time to get it in your garden. It's getting a little too late to start by seed, but you can probably still get away with it. And we have a few plants available for sale. Some of the squashes, calabaza squash, tatame squash, the ahobox squash, this is all a good time to get that stuff started. And like I said, we're at a little bit of a transition right now. We have plenty of the Florida natives available. The Manoa lettuce, the Jericho lettuce, those are all good to do right now. If you're interested in starting seeds early for your fall crop, check out our heat-loving greens and things list at whitwamorganics.com, and you'll be able to kind of find some stuff that's a little more on the heat-tolerant side that you can get going earlier than normal. Now, out in our gardens today and yesterday, I did a huge melon harvest at one of my gardens. The cantaloupe that we have available, we're also going to be planting another round of those. The icebox watermelons, I've had lots of customers have really good luck with those. I highly recommend them. We're kind of getting into that time frame right now where inexperienced gardeners are asking the question, am I too late for this? Am I too late for that? And it's getting to a point where the answer to that question is no, you're a little bit too early. So we're kind of going full circle through, whatever it is that you're too late on planting in that should have been planted in January, February, and March. We're getting to that point again where it's almost time to plant that stuff. So if you want to take the guesswork out of it and just get stuff going now, check out our heat loving and greens and things list. If we're talking about more traditional spring fall crops, you probably want to wait just a few weeks. As far as spring fall crops go, those are the plants that I consider kind of the Goldilocks plants, the temperate plants. In your head, I want you to split those into short season and long season. The short season stuff you can really wait on. The long season stuff, you want to get that stuff started as early as possible. So like the longer growing season tomatoes, it's really best to get those started by seed in, say, into July, middle of August. And then the short growing season stuff that takes, 40, 50, 60 days, you can wait. Really the goal with our fall stuff is to have it all ready to produce right when the weather turns nice. So that's why we need to get the long season stuff started earlier, and then we can wait a little while on the short season stuff. So things like green beans, cucumbers, squash, I would wait a little while for those, unless you're picking varieties off of our heat-loving greens and things list. That's stuff you can get going right now. Like I said, right now we're just in a transition period with some of our gardens. We're kind of trellising up our long beans right now. We're taking out okra plants right now in some of our gardens that we've been growing since spring, but we have already planted other okra plants in those gardens in another spot to take their place. So those okra plants are probably about thigh high right now, and they're just now starting to produce. And the okra plants that we've had in since spring, those plants are coming out right now. The reason we do that is because that is one of your best defenses against nematodes. So rather than trying to have okra in that you put in over the spring all summer and grow into the fall. That's just a nematode infestation waiting to happen. So we actually do 2 separate plantings of those in a separate spot. So if you haven't planted okra yet, it's not too late to get your fall stuff in right now. I'd say probably mid-August, you're probably kind of getting to a point where your okra plants might be producing when the days are getting a little too short and the weather's getting a little too cool, and they're not really too happy. They'll have like powdery mildew problems and such. Our cowpeas are doing really well in the gardens. They're just now starting to produce. The long beans are just now starting to produce, but one of the main things that I saw and one of the main reasons why I grow those crops is they're getting loaded and covered with aphids. And what that means is that the plants can handle the aphid pressure in that family, in the bean family. And if you have a plant that can handle the aphid pressure, it's kind of curling around stuff, making a big mess, that's providing cover. So you have food, the aphids, and you have plenty of cover. And ladybugs will show up and start using those like a nursery. So I actually welcome the aphids showing up on our long bean plants. So, I mean, I do want to preface the long season normal fall stuff. We are not straight seeding that stuff out in gardens right now. The rains are just too crazy. When I'm saying we start that stuff early, we're starting them in a protected situation. So kind of imagine if you're starting spring stuff in January and you still have a chance of frost, you're going to want to probably start stuff in pots or seed trays where you can bring them in when the weather becomes uncooperative, rather than putting that stuff out in your garden and having to take care of it actually out there in the ground. So the tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants that we're starting for fall are in seed trays on seed tables with a cover over them that's clear, being protected from the pounding rains. I know that's not optimal for everybody's situation at their house, but it's a good idea to try and figure out something like that. I think if I were to have a greenhouse, that would probably be about one of the only things I would use it for, is the clear plastic cover that actually blocks the rain, because in my part of Florida, in Tampa, we just don't get cold enough. So that's pretty much it. If you are kind of feeling like you're done with your spring stuff and you don't want to get into any of this summer stuff or heat tolerant fall stuff off of our heat loving greens and things list, this is also a really good time to put in a cover crop, or if you're into this sort of thing, to solarize your beds, or if you just need to take a break, cover the beds up with some landscaping cloth and let the soil kind of rest. Some things that I've used as cover crops are marigolds being grown from seeds. As I mentioned before, the cowpeas, because if you turn them under, they fix nitrogen. Side note, everybody thinks that legumes fix nitrogen in the soil, in that if you grow them in the soil, that they're actually going to add nitrogen. That is not the case. So the rhizobial, I believe is right. JB, help me out there. Rhizobial bacteria.
Yeah,
is that right? Rhizobium bacteria. I have a ghost here that I'm talking to. The rhizobium bacteria are actually inside the roots of the beans, and not a lot of the nitrogen that they fix from the atmosphere makes it out of the roots. But what they do is they make a plant out of it. And if you turn that plant under into your garden bed, then there's nitrogen in your garden that wasn't there before. So they don't really work too well as a companion plant next to other plants to add nitrogen to those plants. But what they do is they don't take nitrogen away. So they don't really add nitrogen directly to the plants unless you're going to turn them under. But if you're using them as a cover crop for that purpose, this is actually better done before they produce the beans. So a lot of that food goes into the beans, and if you're going to harvest the beans, you're not really getting as much off the plant that you really could as far as adding nutrients back into your soil. So back onto what I was talking about, this is a good time period if you don't want to get started on your fall garden early to give it a rest. Give yourself a rest. Go enjoy the rest of the summer. We got 6-8 weeks till we really go full tilt boogie, till kids go back to school. So usually like mid-July to August, September, it's a good time to take a break. Or if you're like me, it's a really good time to get a whole nother crop in before we transplant our long season fall stuff into our garden beds and plant our short season fall stuff into our garden beds. So we got this little bit of a gap here if you're not really doing a whole lot of summer stuff and your spring stuff is completely done. If you go on my website and you look at our collard greens, I'm getting ready to switch those over onto the heat loving greens and things list. I have them listed as Georgia collards. They are not the heirloom Georgia collards. It's actually a Georgia collard F1 hybrid that's more productive and more heat tolerant. And man, it's my first year growing them. The gardens that we have them growing in, they are still producing. Well, in the gardens that the Harlequin bug hasn't shown up at yet, they're still producing. Harlequin bug is kind of like a stink bug that goes after your greens, your kales, broccolis, collards, and it really does a number on them. And it's kind of like trying to treat for the stink bugs. You'd have to be out there spraying them all the time to really take care of them. So typically when they show up, I pull the collards out. So in my gardens that the Harlequin bug has not shown up yet, we're still harvesting collards and they're doing great. I've talked to tons of people who grow collards all summer as well. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to be switching that over to onto our heat loving greens and things list. Let's see, we have a question from a viewer. Michelle Park says, I wanted to direct plant marigold seeds in beds after my okra, but seems like all the rain washes everything out. Maybe I ought to consider starting them in protected pots. Absolutely. Another reason why I started a lot of my marigolds in seed trays and transplanted them into the gardens is because a lot of my gardens, we planted a lot of cosmos, and those seedlings look very similar. So it's really hard for me. And I don't mind, the cosmos just comes up everywhere, and I don't mind pulling it out, and I leave a few, and I kind of never have to plant it in that area again, but it's made it very difficult. So it's not just the rain washing it away, it's also a little bit difficult to tell them, if you're broadcasting them out, to tell them from weeds. So if you're having any issues with the rain washing the seeds away or telling what you've planted from the weeds and weeding your bed properly, sometimes that's also an additional reason to put something in seed trays first and have it come up and then transplant it out. Now, speaking of marigolds, and then we're going to get into the pH. This is also very important. You can't just go to the store and buy marigolds. There's a few reasons why. Number one, the variety matters. I believe it's French marigolds is one of the better ones to use, and African marigolds. I'm going to be bringing them online soon. We actually have Cracker Jack African marigolds. That's one of the ones that fights a couple of the different varieties of Florida root knot nematodes that we get here. And then second, they push most of the nematicide. Am I saying that right? Do you know what it is? Nematicide. Thank you from the back. So the nematicide, it pushes most of that out when the plant is actually forming its flower buds. So if you go to the store and you buy marigolds that are already flowering, number one, they might not be the right variety. And number two, they've already kind of done the deed. I've heard mixed research and studies. More of the research and studies that I find tells me that they don't do anything turning them into the soil other than adding organic matter. So turning them into the soil doesn't do anything. So that the moment that matters the most is when that marigold is growing and they start putting out their flower buds. And that's when you're going to get the most effect in the soil on taking care of your nematode problem. Another thing to keep note of, marigolds are terrible at attracting spider mites. So you might be taking care of one problem and bringing in another problem. So I don't always use marigolds. I'm just using them in a few of my beds right now that we're putting in cover crops in gardens that I've never had spider mite problems. I might be coming on here in a couple months screaming about don't ever do this, don't ever do this. But we're going to give it a shot before we get into solarizing. Most of the time, I don't have to solarize my beds. I just keep adding organic matter and I keep rotating my crops. For me, the biggest thing that keeps my nematode problems down is rotating my crops. I don't let plants sit in there until the tail end of their season when the plant's dying of something. That is just inviting the nematode population to just explode. The other thing I do for nematodes is if I do have nematode problems on my plants, I don't rip them out by the roots. I cut them off at the ground. And what that does is it slowly starves out the nematodes. And I guarantee you, just like I was talking about earlier with the aphids and the ladybugs, there's something that eats the nematodes. And so now you have a large population of nematodes in your garden. They're still colonized all around those roots. Those roots are going to start slowly dying. They're going to become more exposed to their predators. And hopefully, you're going to have a spike in the population of whatever is preying on them. More food means more predators. So that's very important for people to remember. You can also, by pulling out the roots, you can also spread them around. So I like to leave them in place for a little while till those roots completely rot out, and then lightly turn in some new organic matter. And then I switch to crops that are in a completely different family. There's a couple weird exceptions. I found that like whatever nematodes really like tomato plants are the same nematodes that really like Swiss chard. So I've learned through trial and error not to plant Swiss chard in my beds that have had nematodes on the tomatoes. I mean, like there's many kinds of nematodes, and there's a good few types of root knot nematodes. And they're, I mean, not totally, but they're fairly plant specific. So just because you get nematodes on one plant and you have nematodes on another plant doesn't mean they're the exact same kind of nematodes. And chances are this nematode wouldn't really enjoy that type of plant. So switch it up on them. That's good pest management practices. Is you always got to switch it up and keep those pests guessing. So Christina says yes, they get covered in mites. I planted some marigolds with some of my tomatoes, and the tomato worms ate the marigolds, but not my tomatoes. I guess that's a good thing, right? All right, so without further ado, I'm going to bring JB over. Come on in, JB. Oh, everybody, this is JB.
Hi, David. I'm JB. Nice to be on your show.
And also, I just want to point out, this is my first show where I'm actually doing it with somebody live.
That's right.
So
it's an honor.
We actually get to we actually get to be in person.
Thank you for letting me into the studio with you.
Yeah. I was messing with backgrounds and quickly learned that I have a green shirt on, and so the background was just showing up on me.
Great choice.
So JB, why don't you give everybody a little bit of an introduction of, let's start with just some basics about pH. Basics.
Oh, it's a little pun there, folks. This is going straight to science here. Okay? And you know, you talked about pH, you talked about the summer, and we test pH in the soil, and summer's a good time, especially if you're not growing a crop. The soils in your garden may have the correct pH, whatever that is for whatever you're growing. It may need adjustment. You don't know. And this is a great time when you're not growing anything to take a sample and check the pH of whatever your soil is. And pH is just a level, the level of acidity or alkalinity in your soil. And it varies from soil to soil. It varies from Florida to the Appalachia and to the business that we do in the Midwest, and Texas has the soil has its own pH there, and it differs everywhere, and it affects the crops you're growing. So one of the basic principles of gardening, farming, growing is know your soil pH, adjust it to where it needs to be for whatever you're growing. Okay? Why do we check the pH of the soil?
I mean, it's my understanding that it's all about the plants being able to uptake the proper nutrients.
Yes, I mean that's correct. That's what it comes down. What it comes back
to. The plants themselves don't really care about the pH.
Well, not consciously, but they do care very much, and certain pHs are good for bringing up certain nutrients, and your plant, whatever plant you're growing, is going to have a specific number pH range, which it's going to want to grow in. It might be between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7. It might like a little bit more acidic than that, such as a blueberry or other phytochemical-rich berries. Or it might want something a little bit more basic like that, like big row crops that grow in the Midwest. They're tuned to the soils out there, which are naturally higher in pH. So corn and wheat and barley and all these cereals can tolerate a different pH, and those farmers know what it is and measure it and then tune their soils to it.
Now, like, where does our pH sit here in Florida? Is it all over the place?
It can be, because we have bands of very alkaline soil, of phosphate, and then we have sand, a lot of sand, which has a slightly basic pH, but it's basically neutral. But there's pockets of clay and other low pH material,
like peaty areas and stuff.
And if you can find, any swampy or peaty area is going to have a lower pH, and even the Tampa Bay area, you'll find mixed clays and sandy soil. So in a garden, even as low as small as 1,000, 2,000 square feet, you can have different pHs in different areas, and plants will grow better in one side of your garden than the other. If you take your pH properly and know what it is, you can plant what you need where you need it.
So is that like kind of the main thing is, do you try and adjust your soil to the plants, or do you adjust your plants to the soil?
You know, it depends on where you start, where you want to go, how you want to do it.
How far off?
Exactly. If somebody's pH is very low, they're not going to turn a pH that's 4 into a 7 or 7.5. So you would have to adjust that. Basic Florida garden soils run on the high side of 7. It's alkaline, and around here we have to amend with acidifying materials, peat, pine bark, pine needles. Apply your compost tea, Compost Plus by Whitlam Organics, and put that life back in the soil that's going to help drive that pH down.
Now, speaking of life in the soil, so this is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong. We don't have to get this spot on pH, because we just have to get it within a range, because as you continue to grow certain crops, if you have bioactive soil, they actually have the ability to make some fine tunings to the soil pH to get it closer to where, so if you're at a 7.2 and the plant likes a 6.8, continually growing in that same spot can actually bring it closer to that.
Well, and it will,
but it has to be bioactive soil.
It has to be bioactive, and it's only going to do that in the tiny small amount of soil right around the root surface of the root hair. Okay, we're measuring these pHs with this equipment in larger samples. We're measuring it in macro, and we'll get into little sampling procedures in a bit. And so you'll get the pH being 7.2 or 6.8 or 6.1, whatever it is, on a macro size. The plant itself can adjust it on the microscopic level just right around the edge of the root hair. And that's where it's doing it. But that's the surface where the mass transfer is taking place, where it's actually pulling the nutrients into the plant. So that's where it's the most important, that millimeter or 2 right around the root. So we're not measuring that exactly. We're getting a good idea of generally where it is, okay, and then which way we need to go with it.
I think
your plant will tell you the rest.
I think someone described it to me like tuning a violin. So on a violin, you have 2 spots that you tune from. So you have the part up here, the bigger tuners, and then down here you have finer tuners. Okay. And really, it's like you need to get it on the note with these, and then these can just take it if you're a little sharp or if you're a little bit flat.
Yeah, or
you can't really do a whole lot of tuning here, a whole note, but you can get it more in range to do the fine tuning.
Well,
and that's kind of what the microbes are capable.
Very
of.
much like, because a violin or a guitar, which I'm much more used to, as you take it out of the case, and it's going to adjust and go in and out of tune depending on atmospheric conditions. And the plant is worried about fine tuning the soil conditions right around the root here. So we'll do the heavy lifting.
Speaking of atmospheric conditions, so can your atmospheric conditions in the time of the year and the soil temperature when you pull the sample out, can that affect the pH?
Atmospheric conditions are always going to affect soil pH
we have a lot of rain,
because we have rain, and rain's acid.
Okay.
So any rain in North America is going to continually start to drive down all this pH, and that's handy, But unfortunately, much of the acid rain is in the areas where the soil's already, sending that tending towards acidic. But it's absolutely, as far as the temperature is concerned, the amount of moisture in the soil. Again, historically, areas with more arid conditions, more arid soils, has higher pH because lots of water will wash down the high pH materials by carbonates, and flush them out. And the more and more rain you will drive, and I'm talking over eons, will drive the pH down. So you go out west, anywhere from Texas or Kansas to through the Great Bread Belt and then out to the Rockies, and not the Rockies, but then the plains out beyond that, all that is high pH in the 8s and up to 9 and above.
Oh, gosh.
Because they have very little rain ever to wash that out. In the eastern United States, certainly from the Mississippi on east, with the exception of the peninsula of Florida, there's plenty of rain and the pH is much lower than that, and usually is around 6 or so, and for the most part. And that's why the eastern United States has great vegetable growing and great gardens all over, but you have to work harder once you get out west to do it.
And here
too. We've spent my partner Dory and I have spent our career correcting and working with people with gardens in Florida, and it's a slog. And even now I see people in Minnesota and Michigan and such have such easy times growing the best vegetables and sunflowers, whatever they want, with very little effort, where we have to work hard, starting with adjusting soil pH. One of the problems we've seen for many years is Florida gardeners want to plant citrus right away, and they're going to plant it in a high pH soil, not amend the soil, not adjust it, and then wonder why it's not doing well after 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And it all starts with soil pH.
All right. So, check.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to do some testing, talk about our testers, or?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So how do we test soil pH? There's a bunch of ways. And for the average Florida gardener, here's one way. You have to have no equipment to do it. You can go to your county agent. You can take a sample. We're going to go over soil sampling here in a minute, but he'll help you with that too. And they'll test your pH correctly for anywhere between $3 and $7. And you can take them as many samples you want. And that's a good way to do it. You can also use old-fashioned litmus paper, pH test strips to approximate the same thing we're going to do it here. You can bring a sample to David, and he can get it tested for you.
Can they use like pool sample the strips? Are those completely different?
Well, those have a much narrower range.
Okay.
And pool strips go from like a pH of 6 to a pH 8, because nobody's gonna be swimming in a pH of 4.5 anyway. At least not for very long.
Oh, not.
So exactly. So you have to get a pH strip that goes from 0 to 14 anyway. There's plenty of them.
Okay.
That's a way to do it. Yeah, there's an even more basic way. They get a sample of soil. Here'd be one here. Right? And if you had no equipment at all, you could take this, crush it up into its fines, remove some of the sticks and stuff. You don't want to test the wood. This would go, and this powdery material would stay. And you could, if you poured vinegar on it and it bubbled up, you have a high pH soil. Right? And if you if you made a little solution of baking soda and put it on there and that bubbled up, you'd have a low pH soil.
So if that happens, about where are they at?
Somewhere where you need to correct it.
But
if there was no reaction,
talking about they would be toward an 8?
They would be 8 or above. If you put vinegar on it and it bubbled, it would be 8 or above.
Okay.
And
so way off.
Yes, way off.
And then the baking soda would be what? Below 6?
Below 6 or
below
5.
5.
Yeah. And you'd have to amend that too.
Those are extremes.
Yeah.
Those are definitely
extremes.
On the extreme. Those are the numbers we have to start.
But it's this is one of this little pH meter here, okay? And you could stick that. Let's.
I think this one was like $40.
Wow. I hope you bought that a long time ago. They're cheaper now.
So long ago.
They're cheaper now. I remember when we got them. But I mean, the first part about testing soil pH is proper sampling. And you brought us a sample of dirt here, and this is something David's brought in. And if you have a garden,
I'm gonna get the other camera going here, JB.
yes, go right ahead. I'll do a little 3D effect.
Hey, sorry guys, I think we got kicked off the internet. Let me get my second camera going here so that we can get some close-ups of what he's doing with his hands.
Camera two.
Camera two.
Camera two.
All right, here we are.
Okay. And what I'm going to do is just take any amount of soil. All right. As you can see, it's fairly fine soil here. I'm not going to dump it on this table. Don't worry. And then I'm going to take some water. I'm using some spring water. I can use distilled water, but I've calibrated my pH meter with the spring water. And I'm going to put in about an equal volume of that, maybe a little bit more.
So equal volume of soil and water.
Yeah. Okay. And there we go. And this again is a down and dirty. If you want this done on a professional level, you go to the county agent and they will send it out to the state lab or whomever. Now I'm just going to mix this up for a minute here. And
you have to let it sit for any.
Well, you should let it sit for 5, 10, 15 minutes. But we're going to go through the motions here so that people can see how to do it.
Gotcha.
Is it soup yet, David?
It doesn't look very good. Is that what we're having for dinner?
You know, I don't think so. Look that right there. And now I've got my pH meter, and I've spent some time calibrating this. This is this is $70 or so. I use it. I'm a chemist, so I use it all the time for different stuff. I've had this one years, and it's pretty foolproof.
So what's that glass that you have it stuck in?
This is a 4.05 calibration solution.
So you had a calibration.
Yeah, it's like algebra.
Can
you give it 2 points.
Right there.
Okay. I
So
mixed
we've
it.
got these little packs. This is the other one, right?
Yeah, 6.86. Yep. Yeah, they have 3 of them in here. I'll pull them out for you so again. All right. I'm gonna try to. And I buy these powders. You can get them in a liquid solution. You just pour it up in a cup. They don't last very long. I get these little powders, 6.86, put it in 4 ounces of water. And the other one I use is pH 4. Mix that up, it goes right in. And now I have 2 standards so I can calibrate my machine, which I do several times a day when I'm taking pHs.
So you do that several times a day while you're testing?
Yes, while I'm tasting. And now we would let this sit longer and go do something else. Okay. And this soil's coming in the low 6s, headed to a mid 6.
How long do you have to let it sit in there for? I guess it depends on the meter.
Well, no, it depends on how much acid or base you're going to extract from the soil. Okay, because really this reaction's going on here. So we can let that sit. We could do more soils. All right.
Still climbing.
You know, David.
So how long do you wait? I mean, is it as long as it's moving, you let it sit there?
Yeah,
or could be too long because.
No. As again, we could let this sit and mix 15 minutes before we even drop the meter in it. And but for our audience, we're going to just go ahead and show them this what we're doing and then knocking it out. Now it's right around neutral. 7.1. Which is exactly what David said it was going to be.
No, it's still climbing a little.
Okay.
So how many times should you do this with different mixes? I mean, like when do you feel comfortable that you got the right numbers.
Good point. And it depends on your garden or your farm or your pasture or what have you. You will know after doing it a couple of times what it is, and people might have a bad spot. The whole garden or field might be good except for the one spot. So you would measure that pH separately to see if you have a pH problem, and sometimes you do. So you can measure each area individually, or we have farmers and gardeners who make a composite sample. They will go take a little bit of soil. You take soil from a few inches down, and they'll take it from different spots in their garden, put it together and test fewer samples like that by conglomerating them and making a composite sample. And then if they had any problem areas, they would do those individually. So there's two ways of going about and doing that.
I think we've kind of settled down a little bit there.
And now we're at 7.3. This is your garden soil?
Yeah.
Okay, it's good and black.
Yeah, it comes in a little high.
Okay. And this is good looking. Let's smell it. It's neutral. I don't, it's fairly dry. It's got plenty of organic matter in it. It's great soil. I have another sample here from Dory's compost, and I think I'm gonna hand it back to you for a minute while I clean this out, and we'll do one more sample. Huh? How about that?
That sounds good.
Huh? Sampling's key.
So Christina says, David, why would a home gardener worry about pH in their soil?
I'll handle that one.
Yeah.
It's going to improve your production if it's off. You want to know if it's right, and if there's a problem, then you can amend the soil and increase your plant's health and production.
So what are some things that people can do to correct soil pH? Like what if their pH is low, what can they add?
Lime.
Lime.
That's pretty standard. Lime.
Okay.
Lime will raise pH. Calcium
and
carbonate.
then what if they're high?
Bark, chips, pine needles go pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Composting.
Shredded pine bark.
Shredded pine bark's good.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have our next sample here. This is your yard. This is Dory's compost pile here. So this is
Wait, let's get the other camera going here.
yes, camera two.
Camera 2.
Camera 2, come in. We're just going to chunk some in there. And I would, I might take some of these other bits out if I was. And then equal volume of water. And then we're going to magically go ahead. Let me put the water in. And now we're going to skip ahead 15 minutes. Wait, I got to mix it.
So this is definitely pretty simple.
This isn't hard, and every gardener, every farmer does it all the time. Every farmer, every grower, they're always taking soil pHs because that's where problems can start. And they know that adjusting the pH is going to increase their production. Same in any garden. Same in any community garden.
So if they were doing the strips, they would just dip the strips right there in that water?
Yeah. This is already 6.3. 6.3.
We going up?
Not very fast. 6.37. So it's pretty acidic. I think it's good, David.
It's like it's kind of, yep, it just went from 6.
Now it's bouncing
4.3. Now it's bouncing.
Yeah. This pH meter, most pH meters are going to get you 1 decimal point past the number. I use this for processes too, so I like to get it to the hundredths of a degree. Okay, but this is going to be a soil that's in the 6.4, 6.5 range, so it's prime for great production right now. That's and you could amend with that. If you had a soil of 8 or 9, or a Florida yard or garden that was mostly sand, you could amend with this compost that I just wasted it all by putting it in here.
I think hopefully she has more than that.
I know she
It's
does.
a little cup.
I know she
I know
does.
some people who compost, that's what they feel like.
Huh?
They put all this work into it and they're like, here's my compost. Little bucket. After composting vegetables for a year.
No.
So then we have another sample of the just native soil from out here. We're actually up in Brooksville right now. So
We are?
I think so.
Well, you made me wear like a blindfold when we drove here. So I'm not sure where we
How
are.
was the trunk? Was it comfortable?
I'm small. I'm used to hard mattress. It doesn't bother
All right,
me.
so Stephanie says, so best practice is to remove and test this way rather than inserting the pH probe directly into the garden in different areas.
Let me address this for 1 minute. I've never seen, and I'm a blunt person, I've never seen a soil garden pH meter that you stick in the soil like that was worth a toot. Okay, the least one you can go is something like this, which is,
Well,
and you can get them for $20 or so, or maybe even less.
So there's the ones they sell to stick in the soil,
Yeah.
but let's show them why you don't want to stick these in the soil. Let's get a close up of the glass ball on the probe. You guys, I don't know if y'all can see that.
You
can't
can't
really
you
see
can,
it.
but you can see it on this one, and this one they function the same way.
So there's a glass ball in there.
Oh, you can see that one.
Yeah, there's a glass ball in there that you can crack if you just shove that right into the soil. Plus, you're probably not getting it wet enough to get a good measurement. Yep, we see it.
Okay.
So you don't want to stick these instruments. If you spend $40 to $120 on a pH tester, you really don't want to cram that thing into the soil.
No, again, Milwaukee, it's the M101. It's an industry standard, and it works great for this soil application as well. We'll do Dory's. This is for a yard.
You got a temperature compensation?
Yeah, it's got
on there?
a little temperature compensation.
Okay.
Because it's, but pretty much everything I try to run.
Are these pH 410 and pH 7? Is that your calibration?
Yeah, there's a little calibrating tool.
Do you need the little screwdriver?
Well, you would. This thing will come in. This says 6.86. Okay, I'm coming in 5/100ths down. Okay, so if I was doing a process or something more intricate, I would I'd tune it into 6.86.
Sure.
Okay?
Gotcha.
Because it's like algebra. You're giving it 2 points, and it's drawing a line and saying everything else is along this line. Okay, hold on. Here comes the great reveal. This is Dory's garden soil. No, this is yard
this is
soil.
just yard soil.
Okay, which, by the way, has been treated with Compost Plus?
Yeah, in the past.
In the past.
Very, very much more sandy than anything else we've looked at so far.
Yes.
We're in the Brooksville Sandhills.
Got a lot of oak leaves.
A lot of oak leaves.
Which is good.
Yeah, this
Yes.
isn't as sandy as I've seen it.
Huh?
I mean, there's places over like driving in here look like a desert.
Oak leaves is something else you can amend with to drop a pH and make it more
I
acid.
don't think they drop it that much.
Okay.
I
Fine.
think if they're live and green, they do a little bit more than if they're brown and dried up.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Coffee grounds, by the way, y'all, is another one that's a little bit of an old wives' tale. That one won't really bring your pH down much. If you enjoyed coffee with it, then it probably isn't going to do much because most of the acid ended up in your cup.
This is starting out in the 5s and climbing. Where did this sample come from exactly?
Well, it's underneath my grow tower, so it's got a mixture in it, but it's just very sandy.
This is why she does so. I mean, even her yard soil's 6 up here.
Yeah, but I amended with the Compost Plus.
Yes.
So I definitely noticed the difference in the starting spots of when you drop the meter in there, and then it makes slow adjustments up from there. This one's definitely going up way slower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to finish up in the low 6s.
So let me ask you a question. Now, this is just based on my own theory.
Yeah.
If your soil, can your soils be acidic because of minerals? And can your soil be acidic because of organic matter? Can your soil be basic because of minerals? And can your soil be basic because of organic matter?
Your soil will, you're right on everything except organic matter will never make your soil more basic. You know,
I heard
unless
manure brings it up a point. Like composting with manure, that's how we get to our 7.2.
when I say organic matter, I guess you would exclude manure and any kind of biological waste is a high pH thing because we're giving off nitrates and these are high pH items. But really, you want to use organic matter to build this. No, I'm going to back off here. The minerals are always the reason 99% of the time for your pH.
Okay.
In a volcanic soil, which is
Well, I mean, what
nothing but
about someone
minerals, it's low.
What about someone who lives in a peat bog, or peaty,
Well, their
peaty soil? So their pH is low because of organic matter, right? That's kind of So that's not my real real question. This is what I've always kind of assumed, and I've been meaning to talk to you about this. So if your pH is low because of organic matter, should you use organic matter to bring it up?
Well,
and if your pH is low because of minerals, should you use minerals to bring it up?
No, because this pH meter doesn't know. It just reads a number. It doesn't know why you're doing it. The reasons why you do it, one or the other, would be around the pH, but not because of the number. A peat bog example being organic matter, man, that's real extreme.
I went straight for the extreme. How many of us are gardening in a peat bog?
Exactly. I mean,
you should be probably peat farming instead of trying to grow something.
You would be. You certainly would be, unless you're a Scotsman.
Right.
Okay? But that's an extreme example. And in the high pH soils, most of what you see in the United States and Canada, of course, is high pH because it's arid and it's out west. And it was the bottom of a sea one time, but it's never been flushed again. Okay? So out there, soil's very alkaline and crusty. And you pour vinegar on soil in Utah or Oregon, it's just going to sizzle because of pH 9.5 or something. And that's a minerals problem that you would solve with neutralizing by minerals. The peat bog, you're blowing my mind there with that. I mean, you're never going to fix that. You could try, but see, that takes eons to get there.
Sure.
Literally takes millions of years to get to that way. And you're just going to grow blueberries and preserve bodies.
So,
that's all you're going to do.
I think that's why a lot of people end up growing in grow bags, pots, or do raised beds. I mean, that's another workaround. Is you build a nice big raised bed, you just truck in your own soil. I mean, that's there's more than one reason to do that here in Florida with our rains, and if your yard gets underwater, or or if you have an extreme pH issue.
Well, when you say trucking in soil in Florida, what most people think of is trucking fill dirt for these construction sites where they build a house in the forest and take out the decent dirt that has had plants grown in them and fill it up with sand back from there.
Right.
And that's the worst possible thing to do.
I've back when I did lawns, and that's actually why I bought the pH testers and stuff, because on some lawns I just couldn't seem to be able to get on top of all the issues that the grasses were having. Yeah. And so I finally did a soil, and every house that I had this issue with was, like the lawn looked like this. So it was obvious, and it was in a neighborhood with retention ponds everywhere. So it was obvious that the whole neighborhood was up on fill dirt. Yeah. And when I was testing it, I found some soil that was like a 9.5. Because it matters where they brought the fill dirt.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
I mean, we have phosphate mines here in Florida.
That's where you would get 9.5.
Exactly. So if your yard has a lot of fill dirt in it, if your yard is perfectly flat or built up some, there's a good chance that there's fill dirt. Yeah. In that case, it might be really worth it. Whether you're trying to do vegetable gardening or your sod's having problems, I'm not pro grass, but if your grass is having issues, it would be worth it to test the soil pH.
Oh, absolutely.
The other thing, speaking of soil pH, I've also found, speaking of the phosphate, I had a customer in Dunellen, and they were on well water. And I tested their well water, and it was like an 8.8. And so
yes.
basically they were irrigating with this stuff that was just poisoning all their plants
Yes.
and their grass.
Yeah,
So-
common. And not just
So
in
they
Florida,
didn't have
but
a deep well. They had
Okay.
more of a
out
shallow-
west,
shallow well.
irrigation water all over the country is normally more alkaline and will
Okay.
drive these things up. Certainly out west, where pivot irrigations, what they do most of the pivot irrigation, they're using highly alkaline well water.
I mean, can't that just take everything backwards? If you're just watering with really
No, I can't, these people are doing 1,600 acre pivots, so they're talking square miles,
right.
and I'm not sure that what the state of the land in 15 to 20 years is. I can't speak for them, but that's what they do.
Right.
And maybe they amend the water coming out. Maybe they put it through. Maybe they have like an inline pH meter that would automatically.
There's a nursery in Bushnell that
Yeah.
uses well water, and their well water was too alkaline.
Yeah.
And they had a huge sulfuric acid mixing tank
Yes.
that monitored it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was kind of shocked when he was talking about how heavy the sulfuric acid barrels were, because apparently it was like really
It's dense.
really dense.
Yeah, it's dense stuff. Yeah, you don't want to tote that around.
Yeah, he was talking about how heavy
Yeah, it's like a
that stuff
density
was.
of 1.4 times the density of water.
But we're not talking about anybody getting sulfuric acid for their yard.
No.
There's
No,
organic
that's for
sulfur.
a process. That's the process for somebody who's using thousands of gallons of water a day.
Massive amounts.
Yeah, massive.
But I mean, it
amounts.
might be a good idea. The other one that I've seen weird pHs on are people who are watering their vegetables with water post water softener. So after
Really?
the water softener, the
Well.
pH is off a bit.
Yeah, it would be, and you're putting a lot of potassium on. That's good.
Yeah. So
Put some chlorine
so
on too.
so
That's
a
not good.
So a lot of water, I tell people a lot of water softeners have a
Yeah.
shutoff valve on them.
Yeah.
So you can basically any water
Bypass.
coming out of the water softener, you should be able to turn it off right there, or
Yeah.
the water going directly into the water softener, turn it off right there, and then run around your house and see what spigots still work. Because then that's water coming in that
Mhm.
is pre. And I've seen houses where 3 of the 5 spigots were on the water softener and 2 of them weren't.
That's all. I've never seen that or heard of that.
Yeah.
I'm so used to people irrigating with well water
Yeah.
that water softener issues. Good luck.
And I've
Come
also
back to me.
seen a lot of houses where every single outside spigot was on the water softener. They just plumbed the whole house all at the same time.
Well, it's easy.
And just
Yeah.
ran it all through.
Yep.
Not really thinking about, why do you need an outside spigot with a water softener? So that can be a detriment to your plants, maybe. I mean,
Yes.
that's a good spot to, if you're having issues with your plants, test your water.
Plants don't need softened water.
Right.
Okay. Because plants aren't bathing and they don't need bubbles and they make suds. So
Right.
They don't need it.
So let's talk really quickly. Do you want me to pull up the chart, or do you think off the top of your head what nutrients and minerals start dropping out at a low pH versus high pH?
Pull up the chart so the folks can see it too.
I don't know if I can do that.
Okay. But if you can't, then this is your son.
Not bad.
Yeah, beat that.
What is it?
6'5".
A 6'5"?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
they
Dory's
can't-
yard.
They can't see what I'm doing.
Yeah, but I've been amending it with these inputs, so
Mhm.
it's not fair either.
So
Well, this is where they'll be. I mean, you start with sand, you end up with 6'5" soil.
I don't know
Mhm.
how to do this. Let's try this. Bear with me here, guys. I'm going to try and pull up. Yeah, I can still see us. pH chart.
pH chart for plant nutrients.
Let's see here.
Add plant nutrients to your search box there. Yeah, you should get one of the ones that
I know the one you're talking about.
yeah.
One of these.
Cheers.
So like this one?
That'll work. Any of them will work. Is that up on screen now?
Not yet. They're still staring at us. Here's our monitor. That's
Okay, great. How's my hair color? Is my colorist doing a good job?
None of these will open. Come on.
I have a colorist. This is my natural color.
Let's look at this one.
I like his
These
grain
are all
size.
on Pinterest. That's so annoying. I don't have Pinterest on my laptop.
In any case, all the nutrients, the elements that we're familiar with, nitrogen, potassium, calcium, sulfur, magnesium, all the micronutrients, the vitamins, iron, manganese, selenium, boron, copper. I'm missing one or two perhaps, but molybdenum. In any case, they're all best absorbed at one pH or another. And that's why you use this chart that we're going to pull up, or not with your soil pH to determine my plant's going to get nitrogen at this pH, or my pH is too low for my plant to pick up metals or its iron or what it needs to, and then you would adjust. And you might do this when you look at a plant and go, this plant's looking a little peaked. I've got some chlorosis, maybe some venal chlorosis, maybe some malformed leaves or such, which might be a deficiency. Exactly. These nutrient deficiencies are more often than not related to really a pH deficiency. Plants all over the world, all over Florida, have plenty of nutrients in the soil around them, but can't get to them because the pH isn't right for them to pick up. And that's why this whole conversations we're having is something basic and intrinsic to gardening, and certainly in Florida, where you have to monitor your pH to make sure you're even in the right ballpark to grow what you want to grow.
So what is a ballpark? I think
You want at the very broadest scale, between 5.5 and 7.5, and you want to fine tune it within that.
The ballpark's pretty big.
The ballpark's pretty big,
Okay.
Because these plants have learned over the years to survive in as many conditions they have, and the ones that live in the peat bog have evolved to live in the peat bog. Whatever you find there, and that includes blueberries and raspberries and these other bramble crops. They love low pH because they've evolved to do so. And if you put them in your garden, in your out in the backyard where the pH is 6 or 7, you'll get very little production. They won't like it at all.
Now, is there something that people can do if they're already growing stuff and they're pretty sure that the pH is off? Like maybe one of our products?
Compost Plus will begin the process of lowering the pH by putting the microbes in the soil and ramping up the soil biology. The plants will be able to adjust the pH to where they want to be within limits, as we said. You're never going to take a peat bog and grow corn there. Okay? It's just not going to happen. You're not going to, because the pH scale, which we say is from 0 to 14, and we talk about 5.5 to 7.5, it's not linear. Okay, it's asymptotic. Okay, it's on the scale of 10. So something that has a pH of 6 has 10 times more hydrogen ions than something at 7, and something at 5 10 times more than 6, and 4 10 times more than 5. So the range in actual acidity between 4 and 7 is a factor of 1,000.
Here we go.
And that's why you want to put a okay. Oh, we're up here.
Yep.
So, and you can use a pointer of some. Here's some sterling silver.
Yeah, but they can't see us pointing at it.
They can't?
No.
Okay.
This is what they're seeing right here.
Okay, great. As you could look in the very middle, up at the top, you'll see a neutral pH of 7.0. And most nutrients are available there. You can look down further and see that iron's not. Okay? But you can see basically the top part of the chart are nutrients that are available at a neutral pH. And the lower part of the chart your phytochemicals, your micronutrients, your vitamins, as we speak, iron, manganese, boron, copper, zinc, they're available only at lower pHs, in the 5s and 6s. You get them much above 7 or even at 7, and they won't be uptaken to your plant. Another reason that soil pH is tied to plant. Soil pH is tied to nutrition, plant nutrition. You can't separate them. And if you don't know your soil pH, you'll never know if your plants are going to perform like you need them to. So it's a baseline that you have to measure and then adjust from there. And knowing that it's different from crop to crop and plant to plant in areas of your garden.
So I see on this chart, like in the lower pH range, like where do blueberries are happy at what, like 4, 5,
4
5?
to 4, 5.
4
Yeah.
to 4, 5?
Way at the left side of that, the very leftmost is
so
where
they
they're
like a lot of iron.
Yeah, so they can get a lot of iron.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they can get a lot of manganese and boron and copper down there, much more so than a.
So they don't really need a whole lot of nitrogen.
No, they don't.
Even if you gave them lots of nitrogen, they
wouldn't use it.
They couldn't even uptake it.
What would they do? They grow a bigger blueberry bush or something? There's no need for that. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's just not what they're tuned to. They have found their niche, just like every animal has. These plants have too. And they're tasty because plants that are full of micronutrients, have a high brix, and they taste good. Okay?
So what I'm seeing is things that are high nitrogen feeders really need to be between a 6 and a 7.5.
Yeah, exactly. And you can push it to above 7. That's why
a little bit above.
That's why they do out west and grow row crops upon row crops, because they're putting on 200 pounds of nitrogen an acre to grow corn and 120 to grow wheat, and you can absorb as much as you can back at that
crops,
7.
Crops like calcium looks like it's going to be a pretty limiting nutrient. So plants that need.
Yeah, well, we've all seen blossom end rot.
So tomatoes need lots of calcium.
Yeah. So
and I know melons need lots of magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like once you start getting below the 6.5 range, you could start having some issues.
Yes, in Florida we rarely see that. If I see blossom end rot on a tomato, I know that it's because the pH is above 7.5.
Not because there isn't enough calcium.
I've never seen it. No.
We have plenty of calcium.
Florida soil is basically calcium and phosphorus and silicon. So that's what
the calcium carbonate.
Calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate. The same matrix that's in all our bones and all shells is the basis of Florida soils. Mix that in with silicon dioxide, and we get soil reports in with organic matters, well under 1%, and it shows in the soil. And that's the first thing we do is amend.
So, what I'm seeing, so the range is so wide that if your plants are showing a nitrogen deficiency, chances are
you haven't put enough nitrogen.
You need nitrogen.
Yeah.
And then potassium, you need potassium.
Always.
And then sulfur, you need sulfur.
Yes.
But calcium, you might need to adjust pH.
Yes.
And then magnesium, you might need to adjust pH up.
Yes. At pH, the calcium at not far over 7 is going to lock up with carbonate, is going to lock up with phosphate, and you'll never see it again. And it shows in that chart right there. Okay, so by the time you get to 8, calcium's done. It's in the soil. It's in a rock. Okay, the only way to get it out of that rock is to drive the pH down. Now, what happens to it, which it shows on the chart at below 6.5, I really don't know. Something else is locking it up. Who knows what it is? Because I never run into it. All I ever run into with calcium is high pH effects on nightshade plants. And even earlier, not 2 weeks ago, my peppers my pepper flowers are dropping. Okay, you have a pH problem and you have a calcium problem.
That's really interesting. So, so sometimes you might think it's a nutrient deficiency, and it's really a
pH problem all the time. All the time. Right? And double in Florida, but that goes, and that's why the leaf, when in question, leaf analysis. professional soil analysis, but you can have plant tissues tested too, and you'll know right then. Okay? You get a soil analysis and a tissue analysis, you know what's going on.
So from my understanding too, you need to have a healthy plant growing in the soil for the microbes to make the proper minor adjustments to make that plant really happy. So let me just try and formulate, or kind of show you where my thought process is. So if our pH is just a little bit off, where the plant's not thriving but it's not dying, and we're just a little out of range, so we want those microbes to possibly make some adjustments, but we need a healthy plant to do that with. So that's usually where I come in and I do foliar feedings with the Compost Plus and the Micros Plus, in the hopes that it'll kick that plant, like force feed it just enough to put those roots out, get the associations with the soil microbes and the biology.
Well, that'll work.
And so it's not a permanent fix. The idea is to hopefully that soil will kind of kick in and start making those adjustments in the rhizosphere.
We're trying to train the plant to help itself, okay, by giving it what it needs, both as foliar feeding and to help the microbes in its root zone live in symbiosis with it. And we're giving it every chance we can. But certainly the pH, moving the bulk pH of the soil is something every Florida gardener needs to do.
Oh, that's just slammed solid right at 6.46. And that's the native Brooksville soil that's been amended.
But it's in here. That's been using your product on it for.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So let's turn that off. There we are. So let's kind of wrap this up. In conclusion, what are some of the most important takeaways that we should tell people, other than get your soil tested? I seriously, because a lot of my gardens are raised beds, I'm very comfortable with our soil that's a little on the high side.
Yeah.
But I meant to bring some, but I forgot to. This is straight out of the pile.
Yeah.
And I've tested it. It seems like as soon as we get plants growing in it, it comes right down into the 8 to 7 range, which is kind of it's like you compost it and it's done. You got kind of one thing going on.
Yeah.
If you pull it out early, you got another thing going on. It's still composting. And then if you're letting it sit and cure, you got kind of all the microbes are there, but their populations are in different ratios than once they get in the garden and have plants growing in them.
Yes.
And then the soil microbes that just kind of hang out, those populations go down, and the ones that are living symbiosis with your plants, those populations.
And as we said before, a lot of these microbes actually kill the nematodes, the bad nematodes. You wanted a couple of takeaways here, and I think the basic takeaways here are Florida gardens always need pH monitoring, because we're not like other places that have real soil. Okay. And this is one of the ways it shows, and this is one of the things we have to do.
You said we don't have real soil?
We don't have real soil.
No, well, so on a good note though.
Yeah.
Of the crappy soils,
yes,
we have the best.
We have have
the best crappy
Yes.
soil here in Florida.
It's a challenge.
Because if I had to pick between a bad clay soil or rocky soil, or
it's easier to dig our soil.
I'd rather have sand.
Right.
Like if I had to say, you're going to get stuck with bad soil, which one do you want?
The Florida soil, because it's easier to dig a hole in.
That's right. We have the best crappy soil out there.
Okay. That's it. And that's one thing. But here's an important.
Welcome to Florida.
Also, this nutrient deficiencies can be pH deficiencies, and you'll never tell the difference without a pH test and a leaf analysis. But certainly, if your pH is off, you'll think you lack some kind of nutrient, but it's all over the plant. It just can't pick it up.
So my takeaway is more kind of boots on the ground to you guys about what I think is a good move to make especially if you got a lot of land. If you got a couple raised beds, maybe this isn't as important. But get yourself the test strips. Get yourself a relatively inexpensive meter. and send off and pay for a few, keep your samples marked, send them off to have them professionally done. And then when you get those results back, get comfortable with your meter and get comfortable or with using the strips and kind of what they look like, because this does need to be done fairly often. And you're going to save a lot of money in the long run with the amount of pH testing that you might be doing if you feel that something's off. But you need to get comfortable with the tester first. And so you kind of need something to compare that to. So that would be my recommendation.
Fair enough.
Instead of just using, getting your soil tested by, paying $3, $10 or whatever it is now. I know they used to do it for free, but I'm hearing more and more stories about them either not doing it at all or charging, because I think they're sending it off now to other more professional laboratories.
Well, it's state government, and they have to justify. They're operating at a loss.
That's a whole nother conversation
exactly.
for another day. All right. Well, thank you everybody who. Oh, before I go, I've kind of been looking at. Stephanie says I need that shirt. They're actually for sale on the website. I'll be having other sizes here shortly. I'm pretty limited on sizes right now.
Shirt?
Oh, maybe she was talking about your shirt.
I think she was. Thanks, Stephanie.
So where'd you get the shirt?
This is the big
Polo?
boy shop at Dillard's. Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have any other questions. Let's see. So best practice, we already kind of covered all these. Yep. We already
It's
covered
likely,
all these
but you
questions.
never know.
I do have one other question that came in through email I wanted to cover from, I took a picture of it. Let's see here. Gallery. Yes, from Lee Brooks. A couple questions. This came over through email. I wanted to tell everybody that if you're not able to join me on Wednesdays and you have gardening questions or a topic that you want me to cover, you can send them to info at whitwamorganics.com, and I will address those questions on air. So if you can't watch me live and you've watched these pre-recorded, and you do want, if your schedule just doesn't allow you to jump in here on a Wednesday and ask your questions, you're more than welcome to email me and I will cover it on the cast, and then you can watch it later on. But Lee Brooks says, what is the cycle of planting ground cherries? So ground cherries really like the heat. I've had a few winters where it's been warm enough that we do okay with them over the, into the late fall. But for the most part, I try and plant them late spring, and I'm harvesting them right about now. If you can keep your plants healthy through this deluge of rain, then they might produce for you again after the rains kind of stop and when it's still hot. So September, October, November. And because the real thing is the little baskets that they come in, they rot in all this rain and humidity. So even if they are producing right now, if you don't have a cover for them or something, then you could be having a lot of issues with them kind of rotting and molding before they really develop. And then number 2, pickling cucumbers. Do you make pickles? No, I don't. And it says, which varieties do you plant for this? I don't. It's something I want to get into, but I really haven't started yet. So, and then number 3, the Tampa verbena that we have available online, which is a endangered Florida native, actually Tampa verbena. Is it annual or perennial? So it's kind of a semi-perennial. The plants are really perennial. If you got to let them spread out, and they'll kind of re-root. And then we take cuttings and root them. Right now with all this rain, the plants are actually looking kind of rough. And then back in May, when it wasn't raining at all, we had to give them supplemental water. And we do have them in a semi-shade location. But as far as technically, they're a perennial. So in other words, like they don't put out seeds and then die, which is what true annuals do. So we call it a semi-perennial because it's just a little bit of a temperamental plant. So you might have to continue to replant them. Kind of like tomatoes, tomatoes are technically a perennial, but we treat them like an annual because, you can't just kind of keep them around. But thanks everybody for joining me. Hopefully I will see you guys next week. I'm really sorry that I've been a little inconsistent with doing these. Just, March through May is my really, really busy season. And then last week we had that wonderful storm blow through. How'd you guys do up here with that storm?
I barely noticed it.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing. It seemed like most of the rain was hitting Central Florida. They just went
Good
right
for
up,
them.
right up in the middle,
Yeah.
where all of our lakes are. So
Yes.
hopefully they got the lakes refilled. But thanks everybody for joining us, and hopefully we will see you guys next week. Everybody have a wonderful night. Thank you.